Welcome. My name is Sarah Brumfield. I'm here today with Ben Brumfield, my partner, and Lydia Neuroth from the Library of Virginia. And we're going to talk about some work we did analyzing transcribed archival data from Virginia Untold using what used to be called the ChatGPT Code Interpreter and is now called the ChatGPT Data Analysis plugin. I'm going to go to the next slide. So what we're going to talk about today is Lydia is going to give us an introduction to the Virginia Untold project and how the data was created. And then I'm going to give a short introduction to ChatGPT data analysis. And then we're going to drop into a live session, which is kind of scary to do anything live, but don't worry, I have lots of backup slides if everything just falls apart. I don't think it will. But in that live session, we'll talk about how to access the ChatGPT data analysis plugin, getting to know your data, and then we're going to do some different examples. So looking for duplicate data, iterating and improving, and then how to see and download data and code in the plugin. And then we'll either sprinkle this in during our live session, or we'll come back to slides and do limitations and challenges because there's a number that you need to be aware of. And then at the end, we'll take whatever time we have left and have a discussion. And I'm going to encourage you to think about questions you would be asking of this data. And if we have bandwidth, if we have questions left in our session, because there's a limit to how many we can do, we'll open it up and kind of choose some of your questions to ask. So let's get started. So we're going to start with Lydia, who was so kind to join us from the Library of Virginia to talk about Virginia Untold and the data.
Great. Thank you, Ben and Sarah, too, for experimenting with Virginia Untold data. I think that everyone here is going to find this really fascinating. I serve as the project manager for the Virginia Untold project at the Library of Virginia. This project is what we consider the library's flagship project towards digitizing records around enslaved and free Black and multiracial individuals in our collections here at the library. So typically there is a process, like a physical processing step, where we take records that have not been well accessed related to Black history in our collections. We physically process them, our processors index them, and then we digitize them and make them available through the Virginia Untold website or the search interface. The indexing step collects a lot of metadata that actually accompanies the image in the digital repository, so it can be searchable. But we actually also take all of our index data and drop it into Excel spreadsheets, CSV files, and actually from the beginning of the project, we uploaded those to our website and made them public to researchers, anybody interested in downloading it. In 2019, we actually started using the Virginia Open Data Portal, which Sarah, I think, is going to talk a little bit about. This is a data sharing platform that's actually managed by the government, by Virginia, by the state of Virginia. And as a state agency, we contribute our data sets to this site. So we now take all of these indexing spreadsheets, all of this data, and put it on the Virginia Open Data Portal. So you guys can go back a few slides. I jumped around a little bit, but I wanted to explain that we do take all this data that we collect from each record and make it available. So fast forward to 2021, when I started as the project manager, Virginia Untold started focusing on a new record type. So we consider this project sort of organized by types of documents that highlight unique experiences of Black Virginians. And we started experimenting with what historically are referred to as free Negro registers. We had 39 of these volumes in our collection, and we wanted to digitize them and make them available through the project. I see that a lot of you on this call are familiar with this record type. They are very data intensive. So they collect biographical and genealogical information about free Black and multiracial people in Virginia. The localities were actually required to record their name, their age, their skin complexion, their height, where or how they were emancipated. The law was expanded to include marks and scars later on in the 19th century. They span from about 1793, depending on the locality, through the Civil War, 1865. So they provide just incredible information about these individuals that were free during times of slavery. We had 39 in our collection. We digitized them and uploaded them to Virginia Untold, but we decided to experiment because From the Page now offered this great option of indexing. We could use spreadsheets. And we actually thought, why don't we transfer the responsibility of instead of the staff process indexing those collections, could we ask the public to do it for us? We had this great group of transcribers that worked with us so closely, could we ask them to index them? So we did. And so we are in the process of doing that. This is an example of Amherst County. You see the page there, and then down below is the spreadsheet or the data fields that we decided we wanted collected from each of these register entries. So the data you see today will be the registers that have been fully indexed, reviewed by our staff, and exported into the Virginia Open Data Portal. So that's all to say that this is very incomplete. So there are some registers we're still in the process of indexing. Also consider that a lot of the registers are the ones that we had here in our library's collections. There are plenty of localities that we have not scanned. We're working with the counties to do that, the counties and the cities, to collect those images, but we're still in process of doing that. Also consider from a historical perspective that some of these books just are no longer extant. They were stolen, they've been lost, they don't exist, or the localities weren't recording them as these standalone volumes. Some of the clerks are recording them in minute books or order books. So when we're thinking about making large sort of assumptions or finding trends about free Black Virginians, it's actually a very small data set that we're working with. And I think that will come out more and more. So hopefully that was a useful introduction. I'm going to let Ben and Sarah pick up and fill in the gaps with anything that I missed.
Great. So on this screenshot here is from the page, and all the great transcribers that Library of Virginia has worked on this to create these spreadsheets, and then Lydia or someone on her team downloaded this as a single spreadsheet across actually the entire collection that they have. And then they were able to post it on the Virginia Open Data Portal. And if you look in the kind of the upper right, there's is it download or export? Export. And if you click that, you just get a CSV, a comma separated values file that we'll be using in just a minute. So let's, now that we kind of know about the data, and I'm going to reiterate Lydia's, discussion about the limitations of the data. This is a great data set for demonstrating what I want to demonstrate, which is look at this interesting tool we can use to analyze data, but it's not a great data set if you're looking for kind of good historical representation of the people and places that this is, theoretically covering, but it only covers a very small portion of it. So how the ChatGPT data analysis plugin, which used to be called Code Interpreter, works is that you upload one or more files of data. And then just like any other interaction that you've had with ChatGPT, or if you've attended our prompt engineering workshop or webinar, you use natural language to prompt it with questions. But what's different is that ChatGPT actually writes Python code to answer your question, and then it runs that code. And it can give you answers that are textual answers, yes, no questions, or give me a list of 5 things. You can also ask it to return information in tables, which is usually a really good way to visualize some of this sort of results. It will also do visualizations, graphs, charts. Won't do maps, or I couldn't get it to do maps. I have seen one screenshot that implies someone got it to do maps, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. And then you can actually ask for the results. So if you're like cleaning data or trying to pull a subset of data, you can ask for results in downloadable files, and it will give you subsets of your original data in a way that you can download and pull into a spreadsheet program or a database or something. The other interesting thing is as you go along, you can look at the code that ChatGPT is generating. So you can kind of sanity check it if you've got those technical skills, or even if you don't, it's still kind of worth looking at for sanity checking purposes, because as we probably all know at this point, ChatGPT doesn't always do exactly what you expect it to do, and it will go off in different directions, and you kind of need to use your brain to make sure that what it's doing is matching what your intentions were. And then you can look at all that code, but you can also download that code. So if it's something, if you're a data person or a programmer, or even someone who's willing to play with things, downloading that code gives you a starting point that's a lot more advanced than anything you could probably do. It'd take much faster than anything you can do on your own. So there's a comment from David Risley in the chat about maps. That's right. So you can get it to generate code to create maps, but you kind of have to pull it out and stick it someplace else. Okay, we are going to go live. Live demonstrations during presentations is always risky. I'm a couple of caveats here. So I've noticed that ChatGPT in this piece of it in particular gets slower over, like, I actually think the beginning of the week it's much faster than the end of the week. I think more people use it at the end of the week. Definitely that's what we saw when we were practicing yesterday. And what else, what other caveats did we have?
It's not deterministic. So we've run through this session twice and we got different results and behaviors both times.
Yeah, so the key thing to know about these large language models is they're statistically based. So if I ask it a question, there's an 80% chance this is the answer, but a 10% chance this is, and a 5% chance this is. And what that ends up meaning is there's a little bit of a dice roll in it. So occasionally, since we're doing this live, we're gonna run through what we've tried before, but it may not give us exactly the same answers, and we may have to kind of work with that. So let's start with how to get to the advanced data analysis tool. So the first thing is you have to have GPT-4, which is the paid version of ChatGPT. I think it's $20, $25 a month. So you have to have that. You can't get at it if you don't. Once you have GPT-4, you can go to your profile and you can click on My GPTs. And there's a list, and it's made by OpenAI, and it's called Data Analysis. Here we are. So what we're going to do here is that little paperclip at the bottom is how you upload your data. So we've got the Library of Virginia's Free Negro Registers from the Virginia Open Data Portal. It's a CSV file, and we just sent it. So the first thing that I like to do in this interface is what I call getting to know your data. So you can ask, explain what this data set is. And I think it's a great way to just sort of start out. You can picture this in a classroom, but I think we're all learners and students in this model. So let's see what ChatGPT thinks is in this data. So it's going to look at its contents, and it's going to give us the title. It's like, hey, it looks like a historical record. It's probably from the US. Individuals identified as free Negroes. It looks like it has the following column headers. And this is the type of information it has. So we didn't even have to open the file to get this out. We're going to follow this up with another question that's going to seem redundant to this, but we're going to actually ask it to tell us what the columns of the data set are. To paste that in. Yeah. Right. So, go ahead. The first time, it's still running the first one. So I did this the very first time when I was starting to work with this data. And then when Ben and I were practicing yesterday, I'm like, oh, we probably don't need to ask for the columns because it's telling us what all these columns are right here, right? But we were getting very different answers. And if you have done a lot of ChatGPT work, you know that context is really, really important. You want the large language model to have this kind of historical context that in your conversation that kind of helps guide it in the direction you want it to go. And what I found is if we didn't ask this, if we didn't say what are the columns, it wouldn't think about the data in the same way. We'd ask it for information on, descriptions of people, and instead of using, where's the description?
The gender column or the description column. Yeah, I don't see that here.
Skip that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Instead of
it seems to have skipped
it
both of
seems
those
to have,
columns.
did it skip gender too?
Yes, I don't see gender here.
Okay, let's ask it. Say, isn't there a gender column? So we zoomed in a bit, so to make that,
we hope that helps.
yeah.
Yeah, what we found yesterday was that when we started asking questions about gender, even though there was a gender column in the data set, ChatGPT tried to infer gender based on people's names.
Which is not what we wanted.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
How about what other columns did you miss? Because I know it missed one called physical description. I think this is fascinating. The first time I did this, it worked amazingly well. And then every time we've done it since, we've had disappointments like this. So I really want to get it to think about what columns exist. So I know there's one called physical description, which I was going to use later on. And so I want to make sure it gets it right. Get physical description.
Okay,
Yay, physical
description.
Yay.
Excellent. All right.
So as it's giving us these heights, I'd encourage you to brainstorm what sort of questions you might ask of this data, and go ahead and type it in the chat. We may not have time to get to your questions, but I think thinking through and starting to brainstorm what do you do with data like this is interesting, and what kind of questions could you ask? So while you're doing that, we're also going to ask ChatGPT what sort of analysis it would suggest on this data. So again, this is a getting to know the data. So it's suggesting demographic analysis. So age, gender, geography. It's like, hey, there's dates in here, so we can do time trends. We can get details about emancipation. We can look at physical characteristics like height, color, and other features. You can do network analysis. That's interesting. It didn't call it that in previous iterations. So things like use name of mother to understand family structures. You can do comparative analysis if there's other data. You can look at text and do some textual analysis. So lots of different things it suggests. So I find this is it's a really interesting starting point. So the next thing we ask is, what trends does this data set show us? Sometimes when I've asked it this, it actually gives me information that shows that is inferring things about the data. Sometimes it just says, here's the list of trends you could look at. So it kind of depends on what it's feeling like. Ben popped open here the piece where you can watch what GPT does.
So the interesting thing about this is that the analysis of the data does not appear to be AI based. Rather, the AI is writing code to analyze the data, and it's analyzing the results, but the actual data analysis is just running some Python code, which is, to me, a little bit reassuring, because it means that you have something that can be repeated, that you could take out of the AI context and run yourself. Sometimes it doesn't actually work. In this case,
it's there is an error processing it. Looks like we have the wrong column for date of registration. So he's going to, he, she, it. Actually, we've asked it what gender ChatGPT likes. It's going to try it again. This is interesting. So it got it wrong because it capitalized date of registration. So it's going to lowercase it and try it again. What's interesting about that is in an earlier iteration, it missed gender because of capitalization as well. So one thing that you can do in your prompts to make sure you're working around that is to ask it to standardize for case, especially if you're looking at the data in the data set and you want to make sure that last name or first name is the same or not. You can tell it to standardize for case, and lowercase or uppercase everything, so it's the same.
Right, so it's looking at trends. It sees that there's a whole lot in 1794. Lydia could probably explain to us why. But it's also finding a handful of other things. But this is kind of a Weasley
It's kind of
answer.
disappointing. Yeah, we got some better stuff in an earlier iteration. Okay, the next thing we're going to ask it is to show us 4 interesting ways to display the data visually. And this is kind of cool because it actually is going to produce graphs. So the first thing it does is it describes some interesting ways to display the data. So it's going to show us some time trends and registrations. It's going to give us an age distribution of registered individuals. It's going to give us a pie chart of gender by gender. And it's going to give us the geographical distribution of birthplaces or emancipation locations. So that's interesting that it's putting both of them together.
Oh, that does, yes.
That doesn't quite mean a whole lot, but
While this runs, do we want to
yeah, let's go look at
some of these questions? So do we think we could tell it to list all the columns up front and not skip any in the prompt? That's not a bad idea at all, and particularly because the number of queries you can execute is limited to something pretty
40.
short. It's what, 40 in a 3-hour window. You know, anything we could do to cut down those repeated...
Shove more stuff into the prompt, then you can do more.
Okay, so we have temporal trends and registrations, and we do actually see some interesting things here, right? We see the big spike around 1794, other spikes in 1810 and 1831.
I was wondering if those were census years, and maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know.
And just a general higher level of registrations in the run-up to the Civil War. We have age distributions. Unfortunately, it's pretty illegible. Gender distribution. Nat Turner's revolt in Southampton. That would explain the
yes, the spike in 1930.
Right.
You gonna scroll up and see if there's anything else in the chat, not in the yeah. Okay, nothing new there.
Okay, then we have places of birth. So prominently Southampton. Now, as Lydia's explained, this data is incomplete, so we would not actually want to draw any kind of general statewide trends based on that.
Cool. Okay, so I think this is neat, and you can ask it to do visualizations and graphs of any sort of thing as you go along.
So another question we can ask is whether there are entries for the same person in this data set. Right? You have the same person required to register sometimes on different years, possibly in different locations. And this kind of analysis is pretty interesting, and it seems especially useful for genealogists if you have a combined set of data to kind of track individuals over time through multiple records, or households indeed.
So what's cool about this is it's like, you know, well, one, this is hard to do with data, right? But it's going to look for the same or similar names, the same dates of birth, places of birth, or other identifying details. It's like, even if they match, it may not be the same person. So it's going to look for those based on name, date of birth, and place of birth. And it's like, sometimes you get variations in spellings. Yes, I don't know whether it's smart enough to handle variations in spellings, but it knows it exists.
So while that runs, Carrie Saunders asks a really interesting question. Would we want to ask the gender distribution chart example to specifically use the gender column because we don't trust it? The first step that I would do if I wanted to take a look at this would be to look at the code it ran, right? To see, because it might be using that column. I'm not an expert at Python, but I at least can kind of read enough to say, okay, it's looking at the gender column, we're good, versus it's doing something weird.
Right. Okay, so it thinks there are some possible duplicates. So we're going to ask it to show us 20 entries from the data set that are considered exact duplicates based on key fields like name, date of birth, place of birth, and mother's name. So let's see if it will give us this. The first time, no problem. The second time, it only gave us 5. So
It's a bit challenging to prepare these presentations also when you
like, who knows what it's going to give us.
Right.
So
Okay, it's giving us
yeah,
lots of caveats.
where's our table?
The table above. Okay, so it did not actually.
Please show us the table.
So it looks like it is coming up with some duplicates. Finished analyzing. Let's see if it can combine these.
So it does build up knowledge during each session. Do you? Yay!
We still don't have the
Do you
data
want
tables.
to flip to the slide and show the slide where we actually got data back? I think we should, just because it's
Okay, yeah.
tables are useful. Keep going.
Yeah, right.
This one, we actually got data back, and it was in this really lovely table format. And then what we actually did, and we can do this for this one because it'll probably give us, is turn that table into a comma separated value for download. So can we do that live?
We can try.
I think it will work. So can you? Right. So Helen, to kind of answer your question, I mean, this question is kind of out of the blue, but it refers to the immediate previous prompt and answer. And so, yes, it keeps the whole conversation's context, and it knows kind of where you are. We didn't, I mean, it was the one who kind of defined what a duplicate would be. So Ben's going to upload that, the CSV we asked it to create.
Let's see what it came up with.
So now we have our 20 names. And do they look
like duplicates?
They don't look like duplicates?
They really don't look like duplicates at all. No. Okay.
Right. If we go back to the slides, they look like duplicates. Really, they did. So
Yes.
I wonder what the difference there was.
I don't know. It's the ChatGPT anniversary, so it's possible
Everybody's
that everyone's
busy.
on it. I'm a little lost with it. You know, when it works, you end up with
Something like this,
yeah,
which actually
legitimate.
does look like legitimate duplicates. You look at the counties and you kind of look at the information and the names.
What do we want to try to do next?
I don't know, because I'm afraid it's all going to fail.
First names by gender?
What are the most common first names by gender? Let's see how that goes.
See if it's able to use the gender column today. We'll watch it. Yes, okay. So here's an example where we can see it is actually using this gender column. Previously, we have found examples when it was basically counting the numbers of Johns and Marys.
Like it started with the list of common names and then started counting. And we're like, no. We want it based on the data. So now we have the top 5 most common first names in the data set. So let's try to do something a little bit more interesting. So we're gonna look at this mother's name column, because this is where I think it gets really interesting from a genealogical perspective. Can we look at whole families and get information about a whole family?
Okay.
This is the same answer we've gotten before, so that's good. Then we're going to kind of dig in. What can we dig in about this mother's name? So we're going to ask, what's the most common mother's names? In the past, it's given us about 5 of them with a count. Hopefully it will do
Something similar.
Something similar. Oh, yay. 5. Yay. Even the one we expect it to have.
Okay. So we're going to try to do some very simple household analysis. In this case, we know the mother's name. We're asking for her children. This should not be very hard. This should not be as sophisticated as matching households across 10 years of census entries. Laura mentions that it's useful to see it fail for us, because it is definitely failing.
Yes.
Okay. This is pretty good. This does match what we've seen before.
Now, I personally would paste in the next. Okay, yes. So this is really useful and interesting, but you kind of want to see the whole registry entry. So we're going to try this table thing again, which if I had to predict, I'm going to predict it's not going to actually give us a table, because it seems to decide not to do that for a whole session. Maybe not. Oh.
Okay. Not doing tables today, it seems.
So we could do the same thing we did earlier and ask it to make it a CSV we can download, and then we could pull it into a spreadsheet and we could look through it. But we're gonna skip that. And we're gonna move on to a different analysis. So remember, there's that physical description field. And we thought it would be interesting to visually show the distribution of the most used keywords in the description field. Now, when I did this first, I didn't know what Lydia had told us at the beginning, that there were laws that required certain types of physical description. So that definitely is influencing what shows up here, but it's still, I think, it's an interesting word cloud. So let's keep going. So the next thing we thought we'd do is look at the difference between born free versus emancipated people in the registers. And we did the same sort of thing, create a visualization. So this is not the best visualization because the labels are hard to read. Ask for a pie graph. Not perfect, but still easier. We can see that almost 70% of this data set was born free, 10% were emancipated, but then there's this emancipated by deed and emancipated by will. So let's iterate on that.
Right. So Victoria asks a question about attempts to censor topics. This is something that we have worried about and talked about quite a bit in previous webinars, that ChatGPT really doesn't want to say anything that will get OpenAI bad press, which makes it very difficult to use for things dealing with slavery, for example. We've been pretty impressed with this.
It treats it like data.
Right. We have not observed quite the same censoriousness.
Right.
Okay.
I like this one.
Except that it includes born free.
No, it didn't. No, that's exactly what you asked it to do, I think.
Emancipated categories?
Grouped into one, with all the emancipated categories grouped into one. Does not include born free in emancipated. There's born free here,
right.
emancipated up here, right?
Okay.
So I think it's right. So we had a couple more questions here. Let's see. Let's do that one right there. So I thought it was, if I was a student researching this, I'm like, ooh, let's go see who purchased their freedoms, because there would be good stories there, right? So let's go look at those entries.
Oh, and Ling asks, if we ask for the mother's names of those people, would ChatGPT show us the same results? Probably.
Yeah.
Because we're not getting tables today. We're not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's just one there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can't do much data analysis with that. It'd still be interesting to see who that was, but.
So I'm just, if anybody else has questions you'd like to ask of this data,
yeah, we're kind of right. We're at the end of a lot of our prepped prompts.
Yeah, we should probably do this last one and then go into the caveats.
Yeah. Ooh, that's interesting. So this is way beyond my statistical knowledge. Pearson's, Spearman's correlation. Let's see what it does. I bet it could.
We have successfully done, Mia, your question is, can it calculate how old most people were when they were registered? We have gotten it to do that in the past.
In fact, that was the first couple times we ran through this data. When we asked for trends, that was one of the trends, or actually maybe one of the graphs it did, kind of with just the getting to know your data point.
Well, this is interesting. Even though the data is very partial, it would be interesting to see this as a proportion of the records. It really doesn't surprise me that fewer people are listed as emancipated after, say, 1850. That's that is really interesting. Yeah. Do we want to try this, or
sure.
Okay?
Yeah, we're gonna try Mia's question. Copy paste it. When registered, use the word registered. Is there a place of birth column that could be analyzed? I don't remember. I think there is.
Yes.
Why does GPT give different results at different times for the same prompts and inputs? Because it's not like a database where you're getting exactly the same data out every time you put in a query. Instead, it's doing predictive, like even the code it's writing is predictive code based on statistics. So sometimes you get the most common path through writing this code or answering this question, and sometimes you get a slightly less common but still viable way to go through it, which is why you kind of need a human to look through everything and decide if the approach is reasonable or not.
I'm not sure I believe this histogram either, right? Because it says the red line is the age of 21. but we know for a fact that there are people who were
Younger than 21 who were
in this
registered.
data.
Yeah.
Let's oh, David, that's very interesting. David says that he has used ChatGPT to help him rephrase the prompts that he gives it. That's fascinating. But I think we should switch back to yes, our.
And then there's the question that we kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. Can ChatGPT put location data on a map? It can produce code that you can then run to put data on a map. Okay, limitations and challenges. Let's kind of go through these and see what we haven't talked about yet. Okay, the first thing is you only get 40 questions every 3 hours. So I ran into this a lot experimenting with this data. So when I ran into my 40 question limit, I would go away for 3 hours and come back to the same session, and I would get something that looked a lot like this. It loses all that context, and I would have to start over again in a new session, upload the data again, and then I have my 40 questions, but it didn't remember anything that it had done before. So, you know, I asked, please show the register entries for Nancy Gray's children, but it wouldn't give me the full registry, so I had to ask it again. Okay. Yeah.
And it still didn't give you the full registry. I don't see gender there, for example.
I don't know what happened there. Yeah. We tried to do this, which was interesting. I was looking for what words they used in the registries to describe skin color. And what we got were these 6 colors.
Looks very credible, right?
But the reason we got those 6 colors is because the large language model decided in advance that those were the colors that were the common skin color descriptions that it should use, which is not what I wanted. I wanted to know what was the actual words in the registers, not how many times did things that, you know, the large language model thinks are the common words showed up. So, and
this is why it is so important to take a look at the code just to spot things like this.
Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, so that's pretty much, those are the limitations we found. We're happy to have more discussion or share more of our experiences, to hear more about your experiences with this. And I think it's a really powerful tool, but like everything with all these large language models in particular, you need a human who can think, who comes in and kind of works with the data and looks over what's coming out of it and kind of sanity checks it. So yeah.
Yeah. So are there any questions? Let me start by agreeing with Victoria that it feels like dial-up. Yeah, I'm
oh, how slow it is.
Feels like a 1200. Some days it feels like a 1200 baud modem. Some days it feels like maybe a 2400, but I've never seen faster than that.
Thank you, Lydia, for coming. I know you have to run, but we really appreciate it.
We do appreciate it. Thank you.
I do find if you want to work with ChatGPT earlier in the week, really does seem faster than later in the week. Okay, great. Long comment question. I'm so excited by the origins and curiosity and exploration of this type of data exercise, even with the caveats, and that there are, of course, not findings you would pull conclusions from. Do you see any ethical steps one should take in using OpenAI with data from our archival collections? So I'm not the best person. Well, okay.
We are not ethicists.
We're not ethicists. If your data has already been transcribed and put on in your dams, then the large language models have already probably crawled it. So that's my first thing. So I wouldn't worry about it from that perspective. My second comment on it is, so I think it is really, really important for historical data to be part of the knowledge base that humanity is going to be using to make decisions, to develop text, to do all of this stuff that I really think that these large language models are going to start driving in our future. And if you lock down your archival collections, then it just won't be used. I'm a technologist. I've been in conversations with a lot of digital library people that go something like this. How do we get Google to index this? This is the same thing. it doesn't give you as much link back. And there's a lot of really complicated issues, but that's kind of my perspective. It's not really a popular perspective, but yeah.
So Nathan Erickson asks, it might not apply to Virginia Untold, but have we experimented with using ChatGPT to clean transcribed or OCR data? We've actually done some really extensive experiments with this, using OCR data, using HTR data, various levels. And we can send you a link to,
I think our
one of our
10
most recent
ways. Yeah, we
webinars.
have a whole, Ben's going to pull up the playlist from our YouTube channel where all of our different AI webinars are. And one of them is 10 ways AI is going to change archives. And there is a whole
Number 7 or 8, I think.
yeah. Okay. We're playing this. There we go. So that particular webinar we're dropping in right now.
Right. There are a lot of problems with using it on dirty data, right? It is great at paraphrasing, expanding abbreviations, things like that, but it is not good at supplying words from context that are accurate. It's good at supplying words from context that are believable, which is not the same thing.
Yeah, Chris Powell says University of Michigan, definitely ChatGPT got some of their data. There was, for Blake's question, it might be helpful to talk about the use of any source community, about its use with any source community you're working with.
Yes.
Yes. CARE principles, those are great. Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for chiming in there. Not our strength.
Yes. David says we should check every fact in detail, that he's encountered hallucinations to his research.
Yep.
Yes, we agree completely.
Yeah, we don't use ChatGPT for research. We use it for things like transforming data and text.
And sometimes exploring, right? I mean, I feel like some of the initial things where you say, you know, brainstorm things I could do with this data, maybe it will come up with ideas that you don't have. Have we done experiments of GPT analysis? You know, we've done the experiments with ChatGPT itself, but we have not done any using code interpreter, using data analysis.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so we've done a lot where we've taken like transcribed collections and asked for entities. We've done work where you handed a document and ask it to create a dense summary, and that's actually an iterative process. We've done work where you handed a historic document and ask it to make a more accessible version, so something that a screen reader could use easier, could read easier. You can do a lot of variations like 8th grade level, kindergarten level, things like that as well, which is an interesting kind of spectrum of changes. And those are mentioned in that same webinar that we dropped in earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same webinar that Victoria mentioned. I think there's a different.
We did 2 different presentations of that. So yeah,
yes.
They both had the same material. So we actually we'll talk in February about some other work we're doing where we're using handwritten text recognition as what we're calling an AI assist. So some variation that we're still experimenting with of kind of laying over machine generated text over handwritten text so that volunteer transcribers can use that to help decipher handwriting.
Because sometimes it can read things that I can't, for example. Other times it gets things wrong.
So we'll have a webinar on that in February, so please pay attention. We'll come to that one because we'd love to have your feedback.
Chris wonders about how well finding untagged names and finding aids would work. Again, we have not explored this in the data analysis tool, but we've found ChatGPT itself to be pretty good at doing essentially named entity extraction, right? Find me all the names of people in this, and even correlating them to a list that you pass it. That's pretty exciting.
Just needs human review.
Yes.
That's what we're finding with all of this. You need human review. But luckily, we run a crowdsourcing and collaboration platform. So that's kind of where we're thinking. Yes.
Any other questions from anybody? We still have a few minutes left.
We can also bring up the ChatGPT interface if you want to throw some more questions at it.
If anyone has a query they're dying to have us execute, we can. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And thanks again to our friends at Library of Virginia for putting all this data open, making it all
Yes.
available. It's amazing. What would it respond to? What is missing from this data? All right.
Yeah, let's do
Gina,
it.
let's try it.
I guess so. We hit our GPT
Yes.
for.
There's our limit.
Well, that means our presentation timing was perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of empty fields. I don't know what you would choose to do with those empty fields, right? I mean, you don't want to leave out data. So,
All right. Well,
thank you all.
thanks all for coming. Bye-bye.